Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I hope you've had an amazing day and that the weather is great where you are. Lots of sunshine, or if no sunshine, I just hope you haven't been too cold, because let's not kid, the weather is changing. Of course, that depends on whereabouts in the world you live. So I hope you're going to get cozy, and we're going to have a lovely story tonight. Well, part 2 of our story tonight, and it all goes back to a lovely old 1800s home called the Trevelyan house, where so many paradoxical things clearly are happening. So let's continue with the story, but before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's continue with part 2 of our story tonight. Luton looked at me with a solemn expression on his face, and then he said, "My father saw a ghost once, you know, when he was in his 40s, I believe. And let's just say he's one of the most credible people I know, and I 100% believe his extraordinary account. He'd never make something like this up. You can ask him to tell you his story if you like. It's absolutely fascinating." "You never told me any of this, Luton. When did this ghostly encounter happen to your father?" Luton paused for a moment, almost as if he was lost in thought, and then he said, "My father was staying at a hotel on a business trip, I believe it was. I think the hotel was in San Diego somewhere, that had a reputation for being haunted. He was booked into the hotel's most haunted room, but of course he didn't know that at the time. The number of the room was 301, I think it was. There was a girl at the reception desk who'd just started working at the hotel, and she had no idea that the room number 301 was not to be let out to guests, unless specifically requested. Some people stayed at that hotel in that room because it was supposed to be so haunted, and they wanted to catch a sighting of the ghost. Sometimes paranormal investigators would book that room for their investigations, where they'd set up all their equipment, where they would notice cold spots and hear a woman's voice and stuff like that on their recordings. Anyway, let's just say the young lady in reception was very friendly to my father, gave him the keys for the most haunted room in the hotel, without realizing, of course, what she had done. It was the one room in the hotel you never gave out willy-nilly to just any guest, because they may never come back to your hotel again. There's a lot of people that would not be happy to sleep in a haunted room, let me tell you. Well, anyway, my father went up to the room, he opened the door. I'm not sure whether it was with a key or one of those cards you get, but it was an old hotel, so it's a possibility it was a key. And that was when he saw a woman in the room, putting clothes in her suitcase. He noticed that she was glamorously attired. She looked up at my father and smiled, but seemed somewhat surprised to see him, as if she almost thought he was intruding on her space. My father was exceedingly embarrassed to have walked in on a guest, and apologized profusely. I think he realized the young woman in reception had got things horribly wrong, and given him a room that was already occupied. So he went downstairs to the reception area to explain the error. The young receptionist seemed puzzled and confused. She kept checking the computer and insisting that the room was not occupied. "But there was a woman in there," my father insisted. "She was packing her suitcase. Maybe she was checking out." The receptionist checked her computer again and said that my father was wrong, that the room was not occupied. She told him she would accompany him to the room, and they'd see for themselves. And when they opened the door, there was no one there. "See," she said, "the room is unoccupied." My father felt a tad foolish, as you can imagine, and wondered if he'd imagined the woman he'd just seen. The receptionist told him he'd probably seen one of the cleaners putting chocolates on the pillowcases, but the woman my father had seen did not appear to look like a cleaner. She had been very glamorously attired. My father thought he was losing his mind, but then he put the experience behind him, as what else could he do? That night he woke up in his bed with quite the start, as if something had got his attention. He suddenly had this unexplainable feeling that he wasn't alone in the bedroom. He claimed he felt a very distinctive female energy, and that was when he saw the woman he had intruded upon earlier on in the day, who had been packing her suitcase. This time she was standing at the edge of the bed, packing her suitcase yet again. He could actually feel the heaviness of the suitcase at the end of the bed. She smiled at my father, vanishing before his eyes, leaving behind a very fragrant, pleasant perfume on the air that he smelt the following morning as well. When he was checking out of the hotel reception, he mentioned the strange experience he'd had in his bedroom. It was a young man who was serving him at the time, who was astonished that he'd spent the night in room 301, and told my father that he should never have been placed in that room, as it was the most haunted room in the entire hotel, and that my father probably had seen the ghost of Yvette Bradshaw. My father was to learn that Yvette Bradshaw was checked into that hotel with her husband in 1942. She had only just married Philip. He appeared to have been called away from the hotel unexpectedly, on a matter of urgency. He kissed his wife, assuring her that he would return to the hotel later that evening, but he never did. The next day his deceased corpse was found washed up on a lonely beach, but it was obvious he'd been beaten to death. Yvette knew at once who had killed her husband. She had no doubt about this in her own mind. It was a man called Ross Baker, who had been courting Yvette until she chose to end her relationship with him, when she realized he was extremely controlling and prone to violent outbursts. Of course, he was not happy that she had married Philip, and it would seem that he was so overcome with jealousy that he willfully killed her husband, who he saw as a threat, as Philip Bradshaw had married the woman he loved, and he believed that Yvette was rightfully his woman. When the police informed Yvette that Philip Bradshaw was no more, and had been found deceased on a beach, where it was clear he'd been beaten to death, she knew at once who had done this. She promptly packed her suitcase in her hotel room, very neatly. She left a note on all her packed clothes, on the top of them, saying, "I'm sorry, I just can't do this." The following day, the staff had to check up on Yvette because there was no sign of her anywhere around, and staff were concerned about her whereabouts. They found her in her bath. The bath water was completely crimson. Her wrists were slashed, and there was a flowery fragrance, the same fragrance that my father assumed he'd smelt when he saw the woman. It was very, very clear that Yvette had killed herself in her grief over losing her beloved husband, who she loved very dearly. Later, Ross Baker was arrested and confessed to committing the crime. But at the hotel, people have sometimes seen Yvette in room 301, packing her suitcase on the end of the bed. Many people have picked up on the flowery perfume hanging around the corridors of the hotel, and very often in room 301 itself. A smell very distinctly of lily of the valley, I believe. "What a sad story," I said. "What did your father think about it all, when the hotel receptionist told him about Yvette Bradshaw taking her own life in that hotel room? I can't imagine what it must have been like for the staff to walk in on that scene in the bathroom, with the water bright red, and a woman lying limp in the bath. It just sounds so horrifying." Like you, I imagine he felt desperately sad. But he said his encounter with Yvette Bradshaw had been so very real. She had looked like a normal person that you might see walking around the street, only she was a ghostly apparition. "Well, it's funny you should say that," I said, "because the lady in blue I remember in the Trevelyan household was also extremely vivid to me. She was very real. I'd have never believed for a second she was a ghost. I remember as a child wondering how she just suddenly appeared from nowhere. I must say it never occurred to me she could have been a ghostly apparition, nor did I think that it could be Nora Trevelyan. Even if we bought the house, I very much doubt I'd see her again, as no adults in the Trevelyan household ever saw her. And now that I'm an adult, I guess that lack of spiritual perception would also apply to me." "Well, they do say children of young ages can pick up on paranormal energies and see ghosts, much like animals," my husband agreed. "As adults, I think we become a whole lot more cynical. so we're less in tune to our natural environment. Unbeknown to me, my husband had contacted several estate agents in town, asking them to notify him if the Trevelli house ever came on the market. And 8 months later, my husband got a phone call from an estate agent called Mrs. Aubrey Parker, just out of the blue. "Is that Mr. Nestor?" the estate agent had asked him. "I'm Mr. Nestor," said my husband. "How can I be of help?" "Oh, I'm so delighted to have finally caught up with you, Mr. Nestor. This is Aubrey Parker speaking. I'm an estate agent from Cornerstone Property Solutions. I'm calling you today with some great news. You contacted our agency a while back. It must have been about 8 months ago, expressing a keen interest in purchasing the Trevelli house. That wasn't up for sale at the time, but now it is. So I thought I'd better notify you about this." "You mean the Trevelli house has come on the market?" said my husband, unable to believe the great news. "Yes, it has. The current owners are selling. They're moving to Canada. You expressed an interest in seeing the property. Are you still keen on the Trevelli house? It is a magnificent property, I have to say, situated on a substantial plot of land. And over the years, it's only going to gain in value exponentially. It's highly sought after, with views over the Cascades." My husband tried not to sound too keen. He said he was so excited for me that he began to pummel the air with his fists. "I'm very interested in looking around the property. Can I make an appointment for my wife to see the place?" "But of course, Mr. Nestor. Will you be attending the appointment with your wife, or do you want her to see the place on her own?" "I would rather my wife see the place on her own," my husband said. He believed I should see the Trevelli house without being exposed to his influences, to see if perhaps over the years I had built it up in my head to be my dream home, and when I got to look around the property again, so many years later, he hoped I'd be able to sense for sure if I really wanted it. "You, my love, are going to make all the decisions regarding our future home yourself," Luton had said. "If you like the Trevelli house as much as you did when you were a little girl, if it exceeds your expectations, you have my permission to put an offer in on the place at once. Can't say better than that, can I?" "But I don't understand you, Luton. Don't you want to accompany me, to see around the property yourself, to see if you actually like it? I care very much what your opinion is, Luton, because you'll have to live there with me too. And what if the place is not to your taste?" "This is your baby. You've been talking about the Trevelli house ever since I've known you, and my own interest as your husband is to make you happy. You know me. I'd be delighted living in a tent on the side of the street, as long as I'm in your company. That's all that matters to me." "Listen to yourself, Luton. You're a hopeless romantic," I teased. "Well, I can't help myself as far as you're concerned, can I?" So here I was at the Trevelli property, looking around the grandiose mansion that I'd been dreaming about for years, knowing that now I was in the powerful position of actually becoming the house's new owner. I drove up the long tree-lined driveway and parked my car on the far side of the circular parking bay, opposite the house. I stared out of my windscreen window for a moment, caught up in the bubble of my nostalgia, as coming back here again was like coming home. Nothing had changed in that regard. I was impatiently waiting for the estate agent to arrive, for I was 10 minutes too early for my appointment, as such was my eagerness to get here as quickly as I could. Indeed, I'd barely been able to get any sleep the night before. I had tossed and turned all night, because my excitement just simply could not be contained. While I waited, I took a wistful trip down memory lane in my mind's eye. I could see myself as a little girl again, running around the yard with Beau. The memories came back to me in a flood of recall, making me feel overwhelmed. Why was it that I felt such a sense of belonging here? I knew that before the day was actually out, I'd be putting an offer in for the Trevelli house, for the emotional ties I had for this place ran as deep as the roots of a Californian redwood tree. I remained restlessly seated in my white Mercedes, waiting for Mrs. Parker, the estate agent, to arrive. She was certainly taking her time to get here. I was staring out at the Trevelli house with the same kind of emotional tug you would feel if you were seeing someone you loved again, after being separated from them for years and years. Ostensibly, the warm feelings I had always nurtured towards the Trevelyan house remained exactly the same as they were when I was a little girl. And of course when I was 22 years old, when I'd sneakily come back to the house again to take photographs for my vision board, where I'd run into the owner who'd affirmed that they'd never ever sell. But now I was here at the very house I always loved, and I was so close to making my dream realized. My heart was pounding in my chest. My guts had become like a flotation tank filled with butterflies flapping all over the place, and a strange prickle of excitement was making me literally shiver all over, even though it was an extremely warm day, with a cloudless blue sky, and the weather was as close to perfect as you could get. I sighed with relief when I heard the sweeping rush of rubber tires roll down the driveway, and watched a silver BMW doing a U-turn, until it came to a stop. Aubrey Parker, the estate agent, seemed to be shuffling around in her front seat for something, and looked somewhat dishevelled as she climbed out of her car. I think she must have been having one of those bad hair days they often talk about, or had woken up a little too late, with only minutes to dress, as half her shirt was hanging outside her skirt, and her hair was coming undone from its ponytail, in messy clusters. She seemed to self-consciously straighten herself out, as she walked towards my car, wearing a professional smile on her face. I climbed out of my car, trying to look as emotionless as possible. I shook Aubrey Parker's hand, which was quite cold to the touch, I have to say. "I'm Aubrey Parker," she told me. "You must be Lainey Nestor. Is that right?" "That's right," I said. "So what do you think, Mrs. Nestor?" she said, throwing her hand towards the property in a grandiose gesture. "It's a beautiful house, is it not? Quite spectacular. I do love the red bricks and the bay window. I expect you must be extremely excited to see the interiors. Your husband contacted us long before the property actually came onto the market, saying he was extremely interested in this place. And at the time we had to tell him we were not in a position to sell a house that had not come on the market yet. Then serendipitously, as if by magic, it just did, which is why I'm in a position to show you around the place, and why I was able to contact your husband as soon as I could to tell him the great news. He was insistent that you needed to be the one to see the house yourself, without him present. I guess it's because my husband likes us to both form our individualistic opinions about a place, which is why I'm seeing it on my own. He must have seen this house in passing at some time, and decided to contact you about it, to see if it was for sale." I lied. A light went on in Aubrey Parker's eyes. "Well, if you and your husband love old houses as much as you claim you do, you're going to adore the Trevelyan house. It's one of those unique homes, one of a kind, that you can walk around and tangibly feel the history, almost as if you could touch it with your hand. It's like the house has absorbed the energy of all bygone generations, and I think they must have been happy people living here. I mean, who wouldn't be, come to think about it? But let's just say the place feels so warmly welcoming. The current owners, I'm afraid, are desperately sorry to be selling this house. I mean, I don't blame them. They were very attached to the place, living here for many years. Sadly, they're moving to Canada and have no option but to sell. Let me show you around, shall I?" "I'd love you to show me around," I said. I followed Mrs. Parker up the long, windy staircase, into all the rooms of the house. It was all I could do to contain my excitement and tell her I wanted the house right now, immediately. I persuaded myself I needed to contain that enthusiasm of mine, but in truth I was like a pressure cooker on the verge of exploding in any second. When we entered Beau's old bedroom, it was incredibly nostalgic for me. I could see to my surprise it was still a child's bedroom, like it had been when Beau had lived here. I noticed that there was a long row of expensive-looking teddy bears on the bookshelf, and a pretty little princess bed covered with a canopy of elegant, girlish, pink shimmering netting. The bedroom was painted pink, and there were hand-painted fairies on the bedroom wall. In one corner of the room were a display of dolls. As I stood there, I could almost see the woman in blue, in my mind's eye, as she watched me and Beau playing with our dolls on the bedroom floor. I could almost see her smiling at us. Tears came into my eyes. Aubrey Parker looked straight at me, Are you all right, Mrs. Nestor? You seem visibly upset. I'm all right, I said, sniffing. I've just got allergies. It's the time of the year. I sometimes get very overcome. You know, burning eyes and that. I hurriedly opened my purse to retrieve a tissue, to wipe away the tears that had gathered in the corner of my eyes. I certainly didn't want to make a spectacle of myself in front of an estate agent who might potentially think I'd lost leave of my senses. Oh, allergies are the worst, and you're right, at this time of the year they're an absolute nightmare, said the estate agent sympathetically. I wish I could offer you an antihistamine, Mrs. Nestor, but I'm afraid I don't have one on my person. I normally do carry them around with me. I get allergies from grass pollen, you see. As we were talking together, it was in that pivotal moment something extraordinary happened. I could see something flying straight through the air, and then it landed at my feet. What on earth? Said Aubrey Parker, looking quite stunned, the colour draining from her skin. She looked visibly shaken. I was taking everything in my stride, believing that there had to be a rational explanation for an object to go flying through the air like this and landing at my feet. We both looked down at the carpet curiously to see what it was that had landed at my feet. I bent down to pick up a tiny little children's teapot. But this was no ordinary teapot. This teapot was the one I'd played with when I was a girl with Beau. I recognised it at once, as Mrs. Constantine had brought me exactly the same children's tea set that my mother still had stored in her garage, so I'd have recognised it anywhere. What on earth is that? Asked Mrs. Parker curiously, leaning over to examine the pot in my hand. It's part of a little children's tea set. I had one once when I was a little girl. It's pretty old. I'd recognise it anywhere. But how on earth does something like that happen, without any logical explanation? I have no idea, I said. It is an old house. The strange things that happen in people's homes. You have no idea, Mrs. Nestor, said Aubrey Parker, shaking her head furiously. I recently showed an elderly couple around a house at Silverview. The people who owned that house were non-smokers, but I could swear to you I could smell cigarette smoke in every single room of that house. Now you try figure that one out. I think I could guess what's going on there. Maybe one of the owners secretly smoked, lied to his or her partner, claiming they'd given up the nasty habit. But when that person is not around, they clandestinely smoke like a chimney, leaving the evidence in all the furnishings around the home so you could pick up on it easily. Why didn't I think of that before? Said Aubrey. Of course, that must be what's going on. So tell me, Mrs. Nestor, apart from being scared to death by that child's toy being magically flung in the air like that, what do you think of the Trevelli house? I decided then and there not to play any games with the realtor. Not any more. I knew I wanted the Trevelli house so much. So I said, I'm going to come clean with you, Mrs. Parker. I haven't been entirely honest with you, I'm afraid to say. I just didn't want to appear too keen when looking around the place. But I can't lie to you any more. The truth is, I know this house quite well. I came here as a girl to play with my best friend, Beau Constantine, whose parents owned the house at the time, before they emigrated to Australia. I knew I wanted to live here, and nothing has changed in that regard. I feel extremely attached to this home, almost as if it really does belong to me. I'd like to put an offer in if I may. I've always felt connected to this place. My husband believes it's because the original owner of this house, who actually built the property for his wife, in the 1800s I believe it was, just so happens to be a distant ancestor of mine. Good Lord, said Mrs. Parker. Why didn't you say this before, Mrs. Nestor? I agree with you on this one. I think it's no mistake you've come here. I think you were meant to own this house. I actually thought that the moment you stepped out of the car, if you must know, even though at first you didn't appear too keen. I was trying not to wear my heart on my sleeve, I told the estate agent. Well, you had me fooled, Mrs. Nestor. I'm usually quite discerning in that regard, but no, you pulled a fast one on me there. It was 8 weeks after me and my husband Luton moved into the Trevelli house that the moment we settled in, it felt as if we'd always belonged. I wondered what Beau Constantine would think if she ever knew that her old friend had moved into her home, Living on such a large, substantially sized property was a major adjustment for me and my husband. So we did hire help to maintain the large, impressive lawns on the property, along with the extensive groves of trees. I had 3 spaniels and 3 cats, who believed the Trevelli house was wonderful, for they ran around the property at will. They were not used to living on a property where space was obviously unlimited. One day, as I was casually taking all 3 of my spaniels for a walk in the grove, they suddenly became apprehensive and very affrighted, their tails hanging nervously between their legs. They began to whimper. I'd never known my dogs to behave this incongruously before. They would normally run ahead of me down the woodland trails, very happily, with their nose pinned to the ground, as they picked up unusual scent markers along the way, leaving their own, of course. On this occasion they were genuinely terrified, and that was when I realized that the woods had become incredibly quiet. All the bird song had dissipated, and I could hear my own breathing. Something was amiss about the woods that day. I couldn't put a finger on what it was, but something was out of place, and I was hit with this unsettling, airy feeling that I was being watched by a pair of menacing, rather predatory eyes, and that was horrible. I also could smell this obnoxious stench, like something I've never ever smelt before, a combination of sulphur mixed with death and decay, you could say, that burnt the back of my throat and stung my eyes. That was when I saw the dead body of a deer, hanging upside down on a tree branch, with its internal organs ripped out of the body, and the eyes were missing from their sockets. The deer was surprisingly warm to the touch. It had been freshly killed, but by who or what, I wondered. In that moment, alarm coursed through the veins of my body, and all I knew is I needed to get the hell out of the woods. Something was seriously off about them that day. The dogs couldn't wait to get back home fast enough, and it was several weeks before I plucked up the courage to go into the woods again. In the Trevelli house, life was pretty normal, and I'd long since forgotten about the incident with the little teapot that had been flung at me and Mrs. Parker in Beau's old bedroom. The strange phenomenon that occurred that day did make me wonder what it had been all about. Luton thought it might be the Blue Lady's way of letting me know that she was still very much around, and that seemed like a reasonable explanation to me. Luton claimed he'd sometimes hear the rustle of women's skirts on the landing of our home, and would get a prickle down his neck. He said there were spots in our house that would suddenly go very cold. One day when Luton was returning home from work, and had parked his car at the open carport, he said he was walking towards the house with a briefcase in hand, and he felt as if something was watching him, and he looked up towards the window of what had been Beau's bedroom, and he saw someone standing there. He waved at them, and they waved back. He had thought the figure was me, but I assured him it definitely was not, for I had not been in Beau's bedroom that day. I did wonder if my husband may have seen the lady in blue. Maybe she was the ghostly resident in the Trevelli home. Maybe it was Nora Trevelli herself. One day when Luton returned home from work, he'd parked his car in the driveway and walked towards the house with a briefcase in hand, and that was when he felt as if something was watching him from an upstairs window. He looked up towards the windows of the house, and that was when he noticed some movement coming from Beau's bedroom, and that was when he saw someone standing there. He waved at them and they waved back, and he thought the figure was actually me, but I assured him that that had not been the case. I hadn't even been into Beau's bedroom that day. I did wonder if Luton may have seen the lady in blue. Maybe she was the ghostly resident in the Trevelli home. Maybe she was Nora Trevelli. It was when my husband was out of town for a few days. I invited my mother to stay with me. It turned out that my father wanted to go away for a week on a golfing holiday, so my mother told him to go. This would be the perfect opportunity for her to spend some quality time with me. So I felt the arrangement was sound, and we should definitely do this. I was looking very forward to seeing my mother, because I missed her dreadfully. She had been surprised to learn that I had moved into the Trevelli house. My mother lived in another state, and she hadn't visited me since I'd moved, but she was eager to spend some time with me, and kept hinting that she wouldn't be adverse to having some grandchildren in the foreseeable future.
I don't believe it, Lenny. Am I actually hearing right? You mean to tell me you've bought the Trevelli house? The very house that the Constantines used to live in? Why would you do that? Because I've always loved the Trevelyan house, Mum. I always felt I belonged there. Remember, I would tell you that all the time when I was a girl.
Yes, I do remember how enchanted you were by the Trevelyan house. I thought at the time that the Constantines, being so wealthy, well, you were impressed by their financial abundance. The grandiose house and all their fancy cars. I mean, think about it. We were pretty poor at the time, living hand to mouth, and I imagine for a young child of your age, hanging around such a glamorous home with your best friend Beau must have made a deep impression on you. And I rather suspect it did. I always felt terribly bad picking you up from the Constantine home and taking you back to our rather dilapidated property that we rented from that grizzly bear of a landlord, Mr. Pickle, if you remember. I rather thought for you it must be like leaving the Ritz, to go and stay in a backstreet slum.
Mum, it wasn't as bad as that. You're exaggerating. Besides, I was only a little girl. I didn't think like you did. But the Trevelyan house for me always felt like home. And it had nothing to do with the Constantines' wealth. It was what I felt inside.
Well, something must have made a very deep impression on you, love, to have actually gone right back and bought the place when it was on the market. I think you had many happy memories in that house with your friend Beau. I mean, the two of you, if you remember, were closer than sisters. So it was very much a special time in your life. I'm surprised, though, you remember it so vividly, given you were so young. I can't say I remember what I did when I was 7 years old. I think you were very glad to get away from your brothers, for you had little in common with them at the time, with them being older than you, I think. But I think it was Beau who understood you. You got each other. That's why you enjoyed spending time together.
You're right, we did. I don't think I've ever had a friend quite like Beau. I just wish I hadn't lost touch with her.
Well, I know, but these things happen, dear. People move out of our lives and new friends come into them. That's how it actually works. What I can say is it was too bad the Constantine family emigrated to Australia. 'Cause I do think that you and Beau would be best friends still today. I do wonder what she'd think if she knew you were living in her old house. She was a delightful girl, not spoilt like some young self-entitled brats so obviously are, when they come from privilege. I remember at first being very apprehensive when the two of you became besties, because of the big financial gap between both our families, and it was incredibly wide. But I need not have feared. The Constantines were never snooty towards me, even when we did live in the bad side of town in those days. Do you remember you and Beau had an invisible friend you told me about that would play with you in your bedroom? Sometimes you'd even wave up at Beau's bedroom and tell me you were waving to the lady. I always thought it was rather endearing. Very sweet, really.
I never considered her to be an invisible friend, Mum. She was very real to me.
But of course she was real to you, dear. That's the whole point of invisible friends. They feel real. I'm still trying to process what you've just told me. You've moved into the Trevelyan residence, and I never expected this. How does Luton feel about the both of you living on such a substantial-sized property? You're going to need a lot of help keeping those lawns pristine, let me tell you.
You know, Luton, he's cool about the move, Mum. All he cares about is if I'm happy. And yes, we have hired extra help, if you must know, to maintain the grounds.
Well, you've snagged yourself a good man there, love. Luton really cares about you, doesn't he? What does he think of the Trevelyan house, though?
Well, you know, Luton, he wouldn't mind if we lived in a yard shed, as long as we were together.
That's what I like about your husband, Lainey. He's not a complicated character, is he? He's so easygoing, wears his heart on his sleeve, and is happy to go where the wind takes him. While you are very particular, aren't you, dear?
What's that supposed to mean, Mum? Are you having a dig at me or something?
Absolutely not, Lainey. I wouldn't change you for the world. You know you've always been particular, stubbornly set in your ways. You'll never go where the wind takes you. You like to steer the boat on a very select course and get to your destination.
And is that a bad thing?
Absolutely not, love. You know what you want, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, look at you. Ever since you were a little girl, you wanted to live in the Trevelyan house. And now you've made that happen for yourself against all the odds. And I'd have never thought that was possible. I would say when you reach for the stars, you rarely go for what you want. So I think congratulations are in order.
Thanks, Mum. I really appreciate you saying this. So there we are. That is the end of part 2 of our story tonight. Part 3 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.